I'm looking at my outline and it says, what 8 LTEs? Which, that's the real question. What 8 my limited time events? Hey folks, this is Alexander Winn, CEO of Edgeworks Entertainment and creator of TerraGenesis. And I'm here to talk to you about limited time events. Limited time events are one of the most recent features that we've added to TerraGenesis, and it has been such a great addition. Players are really enjoying it, and it's so much fun for us because we finally get to tell stories in a sandbox game. But what are limited time events, and how do they work, and what is possible within them? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. But first, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so that you'll be up to date on future videos that we're rolling out. We've got a lot of really cool stuff coming your way. So if you haven't played TerraGenesis in a while, you may not be familiar with limited time events. We only rolled them out earlier this year. The idea behind a limited time event is that it's like a regular game of TerraGenesis. You have your planet, you have some objectives, but you can only play it within a certain window of time, and there are big rewards that are available for doing it. The other thing that sets limited time events apart is that they tell specific stories, and oftentimes your goals are different than simply terraforming the planet. Before we added limited time events, every game of TerraGenesis was fundamentally the same. You would pick your faction, your difficulty, you'd land on the planet, you'd start altering its stats, or not altering its stats if you're playing as the Hephaestians, and you'd eventually reach independence. There was some flexibility for faction-specific victory conditions, and a couple of planets had unique game mechanics, but pretty much every planet worked the same way. Most of the variety that came from the planets was really just based on their starting stats. Mars was cold and dry, Venus was hot and had an incredibly thick atmosphere, Europa is covered in ice. The game plays out differently based on those starting conditions and how you respond to them, but the general gist of every game played out the same way. Which isn't to say that that's a problem. TerraGenesis has been very successful and players really enjoy playing around with their planets. But at the same time, there was room for more variety in gameplay. And that's where limited time events comes in. The other critical factor in making limited time events happen was the addition of governors. So if you're a really old TerraGenesis player, you may not have encountered governors either. Governors is a system that we added earlier this year, which features almost 50 individual characters in TerraGenesis, each of which comes from one of our in-game factions. Each one has their own art and backstory and their own benefits. As you collect these governors and you level them up, they get increasingly powerful bonuses. But the really intriguing thing for us about them was that they each had backstories, and they each had relationships and connections to other governors. It helped us start to build a story within the world of TerraGenesis, which up until that point had just been a sandbox. Here's a planet like Mars. Do what you want with it. We have a little bit of lore in terms of the faction descriptions and the descriptions of the different facilities, but it was all very minimal. And we were getting messages literally every day from players that were asking, what is the Sundering, or where did the Daughters of Gaia come from? There was this huge opportunity for storytelling, but it's tricky in a game that is a sandbox. On the one hand, you want to tell a story and you want it to be interesting and detailed and intricate, but on the other hand, you don't want to stomp on player agency. Our players enjoy having a planet all to themselves and telling their own story, deciding how things play out with both their choices and the random events. So we couldn't force people to play through a specific storyline. And so we were a little bit stuck. How do you simultaneously keep this open world gameplay that our players love while also getting a lot more specific in our storytelling? That's where limited time events came in. We realized we had this roster of characters from the governor system that all hinted at more story, but the governor system itself wasn't particularly well suited to telling that story. Governors are just people that you assign to specific cities to get boosts. They don't influence the story necessarily. So we decided we could take these governor characters and build stories around each of them and treat it like episodic adventures that we could roll out either as a world pack or ultimately what we decided as limited time events. With this system, we would be able to tell very specific stories about very specific characters and have the players working as their agents, working toward the goals that these characters set on a variety of different levels. And we could tailor those goals to the specific story being told. Not every game was about aiming for independence anymore. Now we could have a game that was all about destroying a planet, or building an economic empire, or saving people from a disaster. We could dictate custom missions and build a story around those. That solved another problem that we'd been having with TerraGenesis: the variety of gameplay. We had added the TRAPPIST-1 system, we'd added historical Earths, we had these systems that were designed to give players new challenges that were different from any other world in the game. But the problem was that a lot of players never made it past Mars. A lot of players never experienced those other kinds of gameplay. And so we wanted a system that could bring unique gameplay challenges to every player. The last thing that we wanted from these limited time events was a sense of urgency. One thing that a lot of players love about TerraGenesis is that it can be a very laid-back game. You can take your time with it, the music is very serene, there's no deadline, there's no timer on the missions. You can spend weeks or even months on a single planet if that's what you want to do. In fact, it was really hard to play TerraGenesis quickly even if you wanted to. We added the fast-forward system about a year ago, and that helped. But even so, most players couldn't finish a planet in less than 3 or 4 or even 5 days. And without the fast-forward button, it was even longer. Now that's great for conveying a sense of gravitas and the scope of what is happening on this planet, which was always very important to us with TerraGenesis. But it does mean that there's not a lot of adrenaline involved in TerraGenesis. There's not a lot of time where you're playing and you really need to hurry. There's not very much urgency. There's not any sense of competition in TerraGenesis. It's a lot more like a garden that you can just do what you want with. Limited time events gave us the opportunity to give that sense of urgency. Because all of a sudden, not only did you have an entirely new game that you had to complete within a certain number of hours or days, but it was also a new experience. The lessons that you learned in previous planets of the exact build order that you like to do, the fastest way to get everything fixed, didn't necessarily apply. Maybe you played on Venus and you got it down to a science how to reduce that atmospheric pressure, but now all of a sudden we're hitting you with a limited time event, also set on Venus, but with a completely different goal. This concept allowed us to present players with unique challenges and then ask them to hurry. This not only allowed us to inject these limited time events with a level of difficulty that a lot of our players were looking for, to really challenge themselves to see if they could pull this off. It also imbued the stories that we were telling with a sense of life and electricity, that this was something that was happening in real time and you had to respond to it appropriately. We knew that limited time events could be a really cool feature to add into TerraGenesis, but it was going to be tricky deciding how. This was one of the first live ops systems that we had in the game. Live ops is where you have a game that is running on a player's phone, but it's connected back to a server that you have certain controls on. So for example, we have the ability to alter the length of the tutorial. We have the ability to alter certain default settings, like when a new player installs TerraGenesis, what faction are they playing as? There are a whole bunch of different ways that we can optimize the experience and keep things fun and challenging, and we were going to be building this limited time event system entirely in live ops. This was not going to be something that we could write an event and bake it into the app through an update so that everyone had it built in. This was something that we wanted to be able to alter on the fly, to roll out new events every week, to be able to control them and optimize them as necessary so that even week after week, if you were playing the same event, it might not be entirely the same event because we got feedback from the players that it was too hard or too easy, and we tweaked the settings as necessary. So we set about designing a system that had everything connected back to the server so that we could control it from there, but also had it integrated into the game in deep enough ways that it felt like a complete experience. We didn't want limited time events to just be these sort of isolated things that felt like checking off a list of to-dos. We wanted it to have story imbued into it at multiple levels. We wanted to have unique random events and a whole bunch of other systems throughout the game that could tie into limited time events if we needed them to. It was a long and pretty complicated process, and I'm not going to lie, my brain still hurts a little bit from the design of it all. But in the end, the most challenging part of it was actually a system that we'd had in the game since day one, which was localization. We realized that we needed to not only be able to input text into these limited time events for the pop-ups and the stories that we were telling, we also needed to translate it into the 12 different languages that TerraGenesis supports. A lot of these languages have completely different grammatical structures, they use different alphabets. It was going to be tricky to get this kind of information and then feed it into the system in a way that was genuinely responsive to whatever a player's preferences were set to. In the end, though, What we got was a system of a couple of dozen variables that we can control from a server, which allow us to plug in information and push it live to every player around the world. After that, the only challenge was writing them. Writing a limited time event is a little bit of an exercise in frustration. It's a tricky thing to design a game that is supposed to be possible for everyone, but challenging to everyone, and also tell a unique story based on player actions that you can't always foresee. And obviously anybody who's worked on video games before knows the challenge of trying to tell a story when you don't know what the player's gonna do. But with limited time events, it was especially difficult because TerraGenesis is not a linear game. You can go too far. It is possible to reach your goal and then unreach it because you kept going. If your goal is to warm up Mars, you can warm it up and then turn it into a lava planet because you didn't stop warming it up. So we needed to design a system, and every time we write a new limited time event, we need to design that event in a way that is simultaneously guiding the players toward the mission objectives that we want them to reach, but also reacting appropriately if things happen unexpectedly. If the player goes in the wrong direction or comes up with a solution that we didn't think of, we have rolled out limited time events that we expected to be really hard, and then we get word back from some of our players who are like, oh yeah, I finished it in 4 hours. You what? And it's because they realized something in our game that we didn't even realize. A little loophole or a strategy that was particularly effective, and so what we thought would take 48 hours only took like 3. As an aside, that's one of the coolest things about having a video game, is watching players learn how to root out every little nook and cranny of the game, come up with strategies that you yourself never thought of. It's so much fun to jump onto the subreddit or the Facebook fan group or Twitter or wherever and watch players strategizing about how to come at a new limited time event. The fact that these things get pushed live to everyone all over the world at the same time creates this really cool culture where everybody kind of puts their heads together or races each other or is trying to come up with new ways of approaching this event, because oftentimes no one has ever tried this before. It's an event that has never been rolled out before. It's a world that has never existed before. Watching the players respond to that is just about the coolest thing ever. So we had this system that we could control the limited time events from the server. And we had it integrated into the game with all sorts of new and interesting gameplay mechanics that we could play with. And then it just came down to coming up with the stories. This is one of those be careful what you wish for situations where we wanted to tell interesting stories, and so we designed a system that would allow us to tell some interesting stories, and now we had to, come up with some interesting stories. A lot of these were stories that we'd been kicking around the office for years. A lot of them were built into the backstories of the different governor characters that we'd already established, so our players could actually see, oh, that's what this event is about? I've been reading about that in this character bio for a while. I've always wondered about that. But a lot of the events were completely new, and what I didn't expect when I first started writing these was the challenge of balancing different types of objectives. You could have a game set on Venus where the atmospheric pressure is 9 million pascals and you have to drop it down, so that's a range of 9 million that the player has to cross. But if you have a planet like Mars, where it's almost totally dry and the objective is to raise the sea level, that might only be like 600,000 centimeters. So all of a sudden now you have one limited time event that has to cross 9 million degrees of a particular stat, whereas another one only has to cross about 500,000. And that creates two very different difficulty curves. And on top of that, you also have to come up with a compelling story about why you're lowering the air pressure or why you're raising the sea level. It's not enough to just say, because that's what terraforming is. That makes a bad story. And it needs to be tied in with the governors that are hosting that event. But trying to come up with stories that matched the metrics, that matched the pattern that we wanted to set, that matched the difficulty curve that we knew our players could keep up with, is keeping a lot of plates spinning at the same time. That's a tricky proposition. That being said, it has been so much fun writing these limited time events. The amount of lore building that we are getting to do in the office, I just can't describe to you how much fun it is. Heather in particular has been coming up with some really awesome storylines and really fleshing out the world of TerraGenesis and some of the important events that have happened along the way. Longtime players will know that events like the Sundering or the Blossoming are things that we've hinted at multiple times throughout the lore in-game, and players will want to know what these things are, and now we finally have a way to not only tell you what they are, but to have you play through those events yourself. This sandbox world-building game now gives us an opportunity to portray battles, to portray crises, to portray stories of individual ambition, and any number of things that we could figure out how to work into the gameplay mechanics of TerraGenesis. Which brings us to the last thing that I wanted to mention, which is where we're going with limited time events. So we've built up a nice little library of 6 or 7 limited time events right now, I think. And we're going to keep writing more limited time events and keep rolling out new events to keep people interested and to keep telling these stories. But in particular right now, I'm working on a set of 4 new limited time events that in the office we've been referring to as legendary events. So these are going to be particularly hard, particularly challenging, particularly complex, and they're going to have particularly awesome rewards. I can't say too much right now, but coming in the next update, 5.15, we're going to be rolling out a new type of reward for limited time events and a new set of limited time events that are specifically geared toward those rewards. I'm really excited to see what the players think of these stories that we've been coming up with. And as always, I'm involved on the Facebook group, on Twitter, on our subreddit, even on the comments on this video, so share your thoughts about how the limited time events have been going. We're always looking for more feedback. Speaking of which, we've been putting a lot of effort into getting our YouTube channel up and running. This is the second video in a series that we're going to be doing, and we've got more coming your way as well. But we're interested in hearing what players want to see. We've got a lot of subscribers on YouTube, and we've got millions of players of TerraGenesis. We know that everybody has questions, that everybody has interest, that they want to hear more about what went into making the game or what's coming up next in the game. So be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so that you can see new videos when they come out. So that's pretty much the story on limited time events. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll either respond to you there or I might make another video just to answer them. We're planning a Q&A video coming up soon, so if you post a question, I'll add it to the list for that. This has been Alexander Winn from Edgeworks Entertainment. Thank you all for playing TerraGenesis, and as always, happy terraforming.